Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week with webinars. And today we have a wonderful guest. Dr. McDougall is taking a day off. And as usual, the second Thursday of every month, we have Dr. Doug Lisle, who has just provided some amazing lectures for us. And today, the title is very intriguing. I'm even intrigued, and it's called Dare to be Lousy. So just a few words about Dr. Doug Lisle. He's a psychologist for the McDougall Wellness Program and the director of research for True North Health Center. And Dr. Lisle has extensively lectured in universities, Stanford, Cornell, and many others. And he is the co-author of The Pleasure Trap, Mastering the Hidden Force that Undermines Health and Happiness. And he's the founder of Esteem Dynamics, esteemdynamics.org. You will see the website in just a minute on your screen. And he is available for phone consultations. And you can find more about those consultations on his website, esteemdynamics.org. So I would like to welcome Dr. Doug Lisle. How are you today, Dr. Lisle?
Very good. Great to be here again.
Very good. Well, we're looking forward to another great talk by you. So why don't you go ahead and set up the PowerPoint. In the meantime, I will remind people that the 3-day intensive weekend with Dr. McDougall is coming up on May. I think it's 12th, 13th, 14th is the second weekend in May, and you get all the lectures really that you get when you attend the 10-day program, and you also have a way to sample the food. And I will be there. I'm really excited that this time I can make it. So hopefully I will be able to meet many of you in person. And who knows, I may be able to do a little concert for you all on Friday or Saturday night. We'll see. So Dr. Lisle, are you ready to get started?
I believe I'm all set.
All right, here we go. It's all yours. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, I call this talk Dare to be Lousy. And so we're gonna look down through some of the forces that stop us from improving and getting better and being inspired. And actually, it's going to turn out that a trick behind all this is actually this daring, that it's required that we be lousy. So we're going to start on this adventure, and we're going to begin right here, of course, with some of my famous artwork. Now, as I was a very young man, I was a little bit out of art supply money. And so my dad said that I needed to go do something useful. And of course, my mother agreed with him. And so what I decided was that I was going to go get a job in building trades. So I tried to convince this guy named Frank that I loved plaster because he was a plasterer. And so he believed me, which was amazing. And so I worked for him for about a week, and I found out that what it meant to be a plasterer was hauling 90-pound bags of concrete to cement mixers. So after he fired me, then we had to do something else. So I didn't know what else I was going to do, and my dad said I needed some motivation. I thought, well, where better to find out about motivation than go to psychology school. But before I went there, my dad actually had me go to a lecturer in Southern California by the name of Jim Rohn. And Mr. Rohn had some very interesting things to say about motivation. And one of them was that in this life, you ought to look at your whole scorecard at the end. And that it ought to show your runs and your hits and your errors and the great plays you made and the times you struck out. But it shouldn't show that you haven't played. And as a young man, I listened to that, and it rang a bell with me for the following reason. A lot of young men like me will stand at the side of the dance floor and watch the other guys go up there and just give it a shot. And so after watching this process many times, watching across the floor and having no runs and no hits and no errors, I tried to figure out why it is that I was often stopped at trying to do things like going up and asking a girl to dance or other such things that were stopping me. And so that will eventually lead me, instead of doing anything about it, it'll lead me to go to psychology school. So there I go to the school, and it's got arches and columns, and it's all very impressive. So certainly somebody there should know something. So I go to the great professor here, and I ask him, why is it that I seem to stop myself and don't sometimes roll up my shirt sleeves and do what it is that I can do as best I can do it, regardless of the consequences? And he told me that it was far too complex, and that there was far too much mumbo jumbo for me to learn to ask that question. And so by the time I graduated, I forgot to ask anybody that now that I knew enough, I was supposed to know. Now, I did notice something in interactions with my dad. And that is that whenever my dad was so sure I could do something, I was not so sure I could do it. So the more he was insisting that I could do something, the more I would be resistant that I wasn't so sure that I could. At the same time, that whenever he would say I probably couldn't do something, I would turn around and feel like, hey, you know what, I'll show you, because I think maybe I can. So this is a very interesting dynamic that will go between encouragement or expectations and what happens to motivation. So that curious little backdrop was sitting in the back of my mind for many years and would give rise to what is known as the slow hunch. And so I knew there was something to this. It just sort of percolated at the back of my mind for a long time. Now, it's going to turn out that there are other people that have been thinking about these kinds of things, and some good insight has come out of some of this thinking. So we're going to talk about three major ideas in and around this notion of what stops us. The first is going to be from a Stanford professor by the name of Carol Dweck. It's going to be called mindset theory, and we're going to take a look at that. And then we're going to take a look at self-esteem theory from Mark Leary at Duke. And then finally, we're going to learn a little something about human potential. So first, we're going to start with Dr. Dweck. And Dr. Dweck came up with a theory called mindset theory. It's very, very simple. And this is, and yet it is a useful thing to know about. It's a way of thinking about sometimes what stops us. What she discovered was that people seem to have one or two ideas about their ability to do something. That they either have what she calls a fixed mindset, and that's the notion that you simply have talent at certain degrees, and you can either do something or you can't, depending upon talent. Or they have a growth mindset that says that they don't really think about the talent issue. It's just the idea that you gotta fumble and stumble and learn, but that you can grow and get better. So these are two very different kinds of mindsets that people might have with respect to deciding about whether they could become a psychologist or a plasterer or a typist or a computer programmer person or a surgeon or a pianist. In other words, people are thinking to some degree, gee, do I have the talent for it? And that's leaning a little bit towards more the fixed mindset, or the concept of, hey, could I learn how to do that? That's more of a growth mindset. And so she got the idea that these two different concepts might have some pretty different outcomes for people. And this is what she did. So she would take kids and she would coach them with respect to whether or not they coach them toward a fixed or a growth mindset. So if a kid did some math problems really well, she would say, wow, you got a lot of talent. You got a lot of ability in math. So that's sort of reinforcing the fixed mindset. Or if they worked pretty hard and did pretty well, she would say, wow, you worked really hard. That was good hard work that you did. She didn't say that you did really well and that you were smart or that you had talent. So that was more of a growth mindset. So in just the way that the words were used on these kids, this is what happened. That the grades of the growth mindset kids tended to do better. So they would do things to sort of reinforce the growth mindset, saying, hey, you're working really hard, good job. When they kept giving feedback to say things like, wow, you're really smart, or you've got a lot of ability there, it would cause a more of a fixed mindset where people would not want to try. So in the previous, previous study right there, it's going to turn out that if you tell people you worked really hard, would you like some more problems to work on? They will say yes. Whereas if you give them a bunch of problems and say, wow, you did really well, you're really smart, would you like some problems, some more problems? Some of these are kind of a little bit harder. They say no. Okay, so they in fact get intimidated if their concept is that their talent is fixed. Now, then she actually went away from grade students, grade school age students, and went into college students to see if this would still stick. And it does. So in a longer term study, they looked at coaching college students with towards either a growth mindset or a fixed mindset type of way of looking at things. And this is what happens. So when you convince people that the reason why they're doing better isn't because they're smart, but it's because that they're working hard, they are willing to dig in. But if you essentially communicate that the reason people do the way they do is because of their innate talent or abilities, then people will not try as hard. So Dweck really sees two big problems with the fixed mindset. If you believe in a fixed mindset, or you get convinced of this in some way, then you might not believe that your effort really matters that much. And so you will not take advantage of what can happen when people apply themselves. Another part of this is that people seem to protect their egos by not trying very hard, because if you don't try very hard and you fail, then you haven't lost as much. So this is the equivalent of a kid at the side of the dance floor. If you do not go over and ask a girl to dance, then you have not lost anything. And so therefore you just sit right there. But notice that really the scorecard is the same for the guy that tries and fails utterly versus the guy that does not try at all and fails. Neither one of them dances with a girl, but there is an ego protective mechanism that will stop people from trying if they feel like other people think that they are already good at something. So this is two very big problems with the sort of fixed mindset, or what we might call the talent mindset. Now, self-esteem theory is slightly different, and it's going to cover similar ground here. And this is going to come from Dr. Mark Leary. So think about a person as a social center of a little group. Not that he's the most popular guy, but just think about our guy in the middle there, and that other people value him to varying degrees. Now, these other guys on the outside value the other people too, but they have a little a thought in their head about how much they value this guy. And so when this guy gets signals from other people that they like him, it feels good. And so Leary's notion is this is actually the feeling of being esteemed or valued. This is kind of what Leary would call self-esteem, in the sense that you feel good about yourself because other people think well of you. Now, Leary found this out almost by accident. He was doing studies with group dynamics, and what he did was he had people interact with a group of people and then get feedback later that the other people in the group enjoyed the study too, and they were going to get together the next week or so, and then would you like to be included, because they wanted you to come along with them. If people got that feedback, they felt very good. Their self-esteem was high. But if they got feedback that they had been rejected by the group, their self-esteem was low. And so Leary looked at this and said, wow, self-esteem is not what we think it is. It's not very, very stable. In fact, it's very changeable. And so he could actually change people's feelings about themselves very, very quickly in the laboratory by just having them interact with some people for half an hour, and then having those people seemingly give these people either positive or negative feedback that they've been accepted or rejected by the group. Now, this research was criticized by other psychologists and said, this is not true, that if in fact people have strong self-esteem, they will not have their self-esteem hurt by rejecting feedback. So of course he then found very high self-esteem people and did exactly the same study and got exactly the same results. There was very independent people who supposedly don't care what other people think, are just as sensitive to feedback of rejection and acceptance as everybody else. So Leary finds that this is actually a universal mechanism of human nature, so we're really quite sensitive to feedback from other people, and this becomes part and parcel of self-esteem theory. But now we're going to look at it in a little more detail. But here are the ratings that other people have of me. So you can see that 3 of the guys think that I'm sort of the 3rd most cool guy in the village. That's fine, there's about half a dozen of us. The guy down below here thinks I'm the 4th most valuable. He's a total jerk. The guy that thinks I'm the 2nd most valuable, that's a very insightful human. He's had good judgment ever since we were kids. Now what's inside my head is actually an esteem meter, a very sensitive device that is really tracking what other people think of me. And so if I get good feedback, it feels good, and if I get bad feedback, it feels bad. And this is essentially the Mark Leary's mechanism that he talks about. Now, inside this esteem meter, when I get positive feedback, as you see on the right, it causes me to feel happy and confident. When I get negative feedback, it causes me to be depressed and anxious. And so what we see is that the esteem meter mechanism is literally a guidance system giving feedback for social success. So just in the same way that when you eat something tasty, it's a signal for survival, and in the same way if you're cold and then you get warmer, that's a signal for your survival and feels good. In the same way, when you get positive feedback from other people, that is actually a critical device for helping you track what you must have been doing to cause that to happen and to do those things again. So it's our esteem mechanism is literally a mechanism to guide social success for a creature as a human that is very, very carefully calibrated to social feedback, because that's critical for our survival reproductive process. Now, it turns out there's going to be 3 primary esteems that we feel. So you can feel very good. Trade partners over there, that's like bosses or customers. So that's like in the world of commerce and business. We have mates that we care about, friends that we may care about, and trade partners. And so we're competing in these social arenas with other people, and we're trying to get good feedback. So when we get good feedback from any of these domains, it feels good, and when we get bad feedback, it doesn't feel good. So we're built to actually try to do things that causes good feedback, and that's how the esteem mechanisms work. Now, human beings and other animals make what we call competitive displays to try to compete for that esteem. So they might sing, dance, do sports, work on their beauty, work on art, which happens to be my forte. And so in this way, what we see is that people and animals actually try to find ways to get esteem. We don't think of it in that way for animals, but that's what they're doing. So here's a young chimpanzee, and what he's doing is he's shaking a tree to try to impress the girl, and this is a way for him to demonstrate that he's valuable. And if she raises her eyebrows and coos at him, that feels good, because he just found out that he has more esteem, and we know what he's going to try to do with that. Now, incidentally, for anybody that wants to know, I have tried to do this before, and it does not work. So it doesn't work for humans. It only seems to work for chimps. Now, here up in the tree, when you hear birds chirping, that's what they're doing. Is they're doing the same thing. They're trying to advertise what great voices they have. I've tried to do this, and that has not worked for me, but it did work for Frank Sinatra. So this can happen, and if you've got a good voice, I suggest that you use it. Now, human beings' displays are very varied. So they play basketball, they throw a football, they race cars, they do music, they write poetry, and they paint. They do all kinds of stuff. And so human displays for trying to get esteem are very diverse. Now, here's the purpose of human displays. Here's our guy with the guitar, and he's basically chirping and singing. Now, it sounds like Bob Dylan or something else, but really what he's trying to do is he's trying to say that he has good genes mate with me, just like the bird in the tree. Now, notice that there's a crucial difference between animals and people, that when animals do their display, it's basically a very direct display of their gene quality. So if you can shake that tree, you can shake that tree. If you can sing that note, you can sing that note. But humans actually will rehearse their displays and get better at them. So it actually makes your genes look fancier than they are if you put out effort. So this is very important. So this is why human beings work so hard at things, is because we're trying to do a really good job for our displays in the village. And if we have great displays, then we will outcompete people that don't have as good at displays. So we could outcompete people that have more latent quote talent if we work harder than they do. However, so people will make inferences about our gene quality from our displays. So it's going to turn out that our guitar player might tell a story, and that is that he might play a little Mary Had a Little Lamb on the guitar and say how hard he tried and how hard it was to learn it. But if he does this, the girl says, well, that's no big deal. I'm not very impressed. But if he just picks up the guitar and acts like he didn't even try, then she might be super impressed that, wow, if you did that so well without even trying, I wonder what it would be like if you did try. And so we're kind of motivated to act like we're not trying that hard and trying to act a little cool about this. And so this is very characteristic of human nature, which is not characteristic of animal nature. So we have a uniquely human problem that other animals don't have, which is to actually to try to figure out how hard we should try. And in particularly, if anybody's watching, to be careful sometimes to not be looking like we're trying that hard. Now, there's a classic cinema moment in a movie called The Summer of 42, where a young man's trying to impress an attractive neighbor lady, and she needs him to lift something. And it's beautifully done with the camera shot that he's actually struggling really hard to lift this thing, but he's acting like he's not struggling very hard. So this is just classic in human nature to do this. Now, this is sort of, I actually forgot what the story was on the right, but there's a famous athlete called Deion Sanders that they called in primetime. He was maybe one of the greatest cornerbacks in the history of football. He was super fast, and so he could cover other receivers. And he is now in the Hall of Fame. He was an outstanding player. But during his life, during his career, he would not practice very hard. And everybody would be marveling at how primetime was a goof off in practice, or would just practice minimally. Now, it turns out later on, it was discovered after he retired, that this was totally a ruse. That around the entire league, his players would shift from team to team. And so there would be crosstalk around the whole league about how Deion Sanders just didn't work that hard in practice. But actually, he had told the owner that this is what I'm going to do to intimidate the entire National Football League. But I will go home and work very hard to make sure I'm in top condition. And that's what he did. So he minimally practiced at practice. Everybody on the team thought it was ridiculous that he was such an incredible athlete that it wasn't even any fun for him to practice because he was just too good for us. Meanwhile, then primetime would go home and work out ferociously at home. And so this was a really clever and unusual story about how people try to look nonchalant and look like they're not trying that hard in order to enhance their display. So now what we're going to look at is the following: that we've got real live mates, friends, and trading partners out there that we're looking for esteem feedback. But in order to get it, we have to advertise and we have to make displays. And in order to do that, we're going to have to put out effort and rehearse. So it doesn't do any good to put out effort and rehearse unless we are improving in our rehearsals. So we need to have a mechanism for telling us that our dancing and our singing and our chess playing is getting better. And so what that audience is, we don't want to rehearse in front of other people, because then they'll see that we're working harder, and if they see that we're working harder, they won't be that impressed with the display. So what human beings created or have evolved is an imaginary audience. And that imaginary audience can watch us in our own rehearsals and give us feedback as if they were real people. And this is actually the self-esteem mechanism. And so the self-esteem mechanism is built of an imaginary audience along with our esteem meter that sits inside. And the imaginary audience gives us feedback on our rehearsals. And if we do a beautiful rehearsal, they give us positive feedback. And if we do a lousy rehearsal, they give us negative feedback, just like it was regular people watching. Now let's go back to Mr. Rohn's scorecard. Scorecard question is the following: that at the end of this life, let it show your runs, your hits, your errors, the great plays you made, the times you struck out. Let it show it all, but don't let it show you haven't played. How would you explain that? Many people, including myself at times in my life, sit on the sidelines and do not roll up their shirt sleeves and give something their best effort. And Mr. Rohn was trying to ask that question. Why does that happen? And he didn't have an answer. He was an inspirational speaker that you felt the pressure of his words saying, yes, why are you standing on the sideline? Why are you not taking charge of this and doing the very best you can? Let it show the times that you struck out, but get out there and swing the bat. That's what he's trying to say, and it made sense to him, but to us, often at times in our lives, it makes sense to not swing the bat and to sit on the sideline. And so we're going to now try to look a little bit more into this as we put this piece together. What we're going to now look at is the truth about human potential. And we're going to get an assist from a fine writer by the name of Daniel Coyle and a book called The Talent Code. And this is the story of the talent code. And what we're looking at right there, I'll tell you about in a second, because it's not a bullseye, but it might as well be. We're going to now look at what this funny little picture is. Now, the story of the talent code goes to Brazilian soccer. And nowadays the world is caught up. But there was a time for many, many years, in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, where Brazilian soccer was head and shoulders above the rest of the world. And in looking at Brazilian soccer players at that time, people were mesmerized at the quickness and ability and agility, and it seemed like they were just naturally more talented than everybody else. And so as people tried to figure this out, they thought, well, maybe it's because it's a bunch of poor kids play so much soccer. And but the truth is, there's poor countries all over the world where people played soccer, and that wasn't accounting for it. Well, maybe it was just that there was a lot of particularly athletic people in Brazil. And but it turns out there's athletic people everywhere if you measure this objectively. And so this is going to be, in watching the Brazilians, turns out that somebody came up for a name with this. The reason why Brazilians actually were so dominant is because they played a little game that you played in a smaller territory. I forget what it's called, foosball or some such thing. I'm getting it wrong. But the thing is that they didn't play outside on the big arena. They played inside. And by playing inside in much shorter quarters, the kids had to develop very quick moves. And they got massive practice because they were in such close quarters. They got more repetitions. And this leads to what the world calls the holy shit effect. It's like, my God, when you look at these guys, they can do things that nobody else can do. It looks like it's magical. But the truth of the matter is, it's not magical. It's simply a result of more practice than everybody has. Other countries with poor kids who have athletic ambitions did not play this game inside. And as a result, they did not get the level of the practice. The practice of playing an inside game, it was estimated to be, once this was all figured out, to be 6 times as efficient as playing outside. Now, we're going to learn about what's happening with practice. This is a phenomenon, this is a part of your nervous system called the myelin sheath. And I want you to think about these as wires. They might as well be electrical wires. These are our nerve cells. And these nerve cells, what goes on is that there will be a, let's suppose one of those cells, nerve cells, if you think about one in the middle of the group on the left, that suppose you were trying to learn to play the piano, and you were going to take your index finger, and your teacher was going to show you where to hit middle C. And he or she wanted you to have your hand up at the right angle and start to move that finger up and down. If you did, what that is a pattern of electrical impulse is going to go down one of those wires. And it's going to eventually attach itself. It's going to hit a muscle it's attached to, and give the muscle the signal to contract. And that's why your hand, your finger will move up and down and hit that key. But what we're going to find is that if this is the first time you've done it, that other nearby fingers, like your middle finger, wants to move. And that there's actually a little bit of uncoordination as you try to do this over and over again. You're not that smooth and not that quick at it. And the reason is that as that electricity is going down that wire, it's leaking electricity to the nearby other wires, and the other wires are moving a little bit. And because some of that electricity is being essentially wasted, the signal is not that strong and it's not that fast. But as you continue to move that finger and use that one wire more, what happens is that there's a material that gets squirted out from nearby support cells called myelin. And what it does is it wraps itself around that one wire that we're trying to use so often, that we're using so often, and it insulates it essentially with a waxy substance. And that waxy substance, what it does is it causes the electrical signal to not leak to the nearby neurons. And so it insulates it just like insulation of wires in a wall. And in doing that, what happens is that finger gets more accurate. So it's not moved, the other fingers are not moving, and the signal is faster. And the more you hit that little thing, the more and more myelin gets wrapped. So we can see in our little myelin picture, there's a little dot where that's a cross section. If we were to cut that neuron, the little black dot represents the neuron, and then the first little circle is the first little set of myelin sheath that got wrapped around there. And then the person kept working at it and more myelin sheath got wrapped. And then the person kept working and more myelin sheath got wrapped. It turns out that a person that is an expert in piano will wrap 250 sheets of myelin sheath around some of those neurons. And they will effectively make a fantastically fast and efficient circuit, and they can move their fingers faster than you can imagine. Now, here's the deal. That they could not do this because they had talent. This is not how this worked. This had to be mechanically caused by the repetitive efforts. There is no other way to have this happen. Myelin sheath is going to be the way that this is going to work. And so no genius is born. Mozart was not born with the ability to play the piano. Mozart had to wrap the myelin sheath, okay? And Michael Jordan was not born with the ability to shoot a basketball. He had to wrap the myelin sheath. And so what we're going to find out is that all human ability winds up being very mechanical, as the brain simply goes through a set of procedures in order to make the thing that the person is doing over and over again more and more efficient. It's literally a part of the energy conservation system that resides as a biological imperative, just the reason why an organism goes after, or a predator goes after a prey animal that's weak and sick. In the same way, the myelin sheath gets wrapped around neurons that you use over and over again, because it knows that you're going to likely use them again, and it wants to make that movement efficient. Now, this is how you can use this to learn better. Turns out that if we try to have you memorize the words on the left, you'll do so at it, and you can keep repeating them. But if we make you do it on the right, we try to have you memorize the things on the right, you will be several times more efficient at remembering these later. And the reason is that there's something about the way these neurons work that if you have to struggle, you learn better. It's a fascinating concept. So struggling winds up being an essential component in helping wrap the myelin sheath. Now, in the late 1990s, there was one or two South Korean women on the LPGA tour. And that year, I think it was 1997, one of these young girls named Siri Pak, I believe, won the PGA Championship, which is a major championship in golf. This electrified South Korea. And all over South Korea, little girls got out their little clubs, and dads were sawing off little clubs, and little girls started swinging golf clubs. Within 15 years, they overwhelmingly dominated the LPGA Tour in the United States. It's not even close. Now, so sitting inside of South Korea as was anywhere. Was all kinds of human potential right there. And all that needed to happen was the wrapping of the myelin sheath. And they did it, and 15 years later, we see it happen. Okay, so there is nothing magical about Brazil and the Brazilians' ability to play soccer. They wrapped the myelin sheath, and now they can do it well. There's nothing magical about South Korean women and their ability to play golf. They wrapped the myelin sheath, and now they play well. So this is how this works. A music educator by the name of Gary McPherson tried to figure out what caused some musicians to be great and some musicians to be average and some to be so-so. And so he's taking talented young music students and trying to figure out what was going on. Try to figure out whether it was their intelligence that caused them to be good later, or did they have an ear where they had perfect pitch, or whether they were, because music was kind of like mathematics, was that they were good at mathematics, or did they have a good sense of rhythm, or did they have great eye motor coordination in their hands? Maybe family income, they were getting support from their families to help them get better lessons. None of this mattered. None of it. Here's what mattered. What mattered was if you asked them a simple question, do you plan to be playing this instrument 10 years from now? It turns out if the answer was yes, then when those kids practiced, they were serious about it and they wrapped the myelin sheath. When it turned out that they weren't that serious, they were fiddling around and they weren't really focused. And so it turned out when you fiddle around and really don't have your heart in it, the sheath doesn't wrap very well. So this is very interesting about something that he found. When people are determined and they're determined to struggle and get it right, that's when this happens. I believe this guy that figured this out was a guy named de Groot in the early 1900s, maybe 1940s. He was very interested in so-called geniuses of chess. And so what he did was he measured how well chess players, if you move chess pieces around and then let them look at the board for a few seconds, whether these brilliant chess masters could tell you where the pieces were. And it turns out they could. They were incredible. Where an average player couldn't do it very well. And so many people thought that that means that these chess people are just so much smarter than everybody else. And that's the reason they're such great players. But then he ran a very interesting experiment. What he did was he actually put the pieces on the board in a random fashion that made no sense relative to chess. And then he showed the board with the pieces to the so-called geniuses versus average people, and there was no difference. It turns out that what the so-called geniuses had done is that they had learned through wrapping the myelin sheath characteristics of the board and the nature of relationship between pieces. And only through repetition had they learned this. They'd wrapped the myelin sheath so that when they looked at a board, they could see that board and its relationships very well. This was not because of some superhuman genius ability that they had that was latent to them. It was actually a characteristic of what they had learned. This was a very important study in psychology that was totally ignored for about 50 years. Which brings me back to dancing. Now, one of the reasons I didn't go out there and try to dance is because I said, well, I don't have any talent at dancing, and I don't seem to have any sense of rhythm, and I'm just going to step on people's feet, and it's going to be embarrassing, and the girl's going to say no anyway, so forget it. Well, fast forward 40 years, and we read The Talent Code by Daniel Coyne, and we learn about mindset theory by Carol Dweck, and we learn that, you know what, you got to just be lousy. You got to be willing to be lousy if you're ever going to wrap the myelin sheath and get better. And instead of trying to look cool and never doing this, I finally decided in my 50s, you know what? I might as well try to learn how to dance. Now, I'm going to step on a few feet, and I'm going to beat up a few toes. But you know what? There's no possible way that if I get some coaching and work on the fundamentals that I'm not going to be better than when I started. There's no way that's not going to happen. Because now I know that the myelin sheath will wrap, the myelin sheath will improve my abilities, and I can't stop myself from improving. All I have to do is I have to dare to be lousy for a while, and then it's going to get better. I did this, by the way, and after about 4 months, I went from being terrible to being just mediocre, which was a huge improvement, and I'm very proud of that. So this is the process of human improvement. Accomplishment of any kind looks complicated. It looks very complicated. It looks like you have to be a genius to do it well, but you never do. What needs to happen is we simply need to break the complicated accomplishment into small parts. And then what we have to do is we have to practice slowly. And it's going to turn out that when we practice slowly, we are going to make errors. And folks, we have to make errors because it's in the struggling of making the errors in very slow practice that the myelin sheath starts to form. It starts to figure out what it needs to do. And if we struggle, so much the better. So that if we're trying to focus and trying to do the best we can and we're screwing up, we are absolutely on the right track. That will start to build the myelin sheath. Practice makes myelin. Myelin makes perfect. This is actually how this works. So that whenever you witness someone doing something extremely well, this never happened by accident. It didn't happen through natural talent. They may have had some natural talent that they would add to the mix, but the truth of the matter is any ability at all coming from any angle in life, this happened as a result of this very slow, methodical, struggling, repetitive practice, and that's what happens. And finally, learning never ends. But it doesn't matter if you're 6 or 60, you can wrap the myelin sheath just fine. So someone who has never played the piano before or has never danced and worried that they can't do this or going to look silly, I guarantee you, you will look silly and you're going to fumble and struggle, but guess what? You won't be fumbling and struggling for long because your nervous system ingeniously has the ability to wrap the myelin sheath and help you to get you more efficient and more smooth and more competent. All we have to do is we have to dare ourselves that we're willing to be lousy. And we are doomed to improve if we take the dare. This is a little place called Lisle, California. It lives in my head. And I know that across the creek here, I'm in Lousy County when I begin anything. But across the creek is Mediocre County. Things are going to get better over there. I'm going to go from lousy to mediocre. All I have to do is cross that creek. And I know how to do it. I have to wade into the water. It only goes up to your ankles. It's not that bad. It's cold and it's uncomfortable. It's slippery. And if you slip on a rock, you might fall in and get wet and cold. But that's not that bad. You're not going to get hurt. Just get across over there to Mediocre County, and the next county over is good. That's where we start to get decent, okay? And after you're good, if you keep doing it and if you're interested, you'll get quite good. And this is how we wind up, folks, with the life you deserve. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lisle. That this presentation gives us all hope that it's sometimes it's not just what we call natural talent, but am I right to paraphrase and say that what you presented is that is the hard work that we put in, right?
Yes, okay. The hard work that we put in, we will be paid very well for that hard work, and all we need to do is realize that's what it takes, and don't be intimidated into thinking that we have to be a natural, because we don't have to be.
Right. Well, thank you very much again, and I have put on the screen here your contact information in case everybody. Actually, I think I have. I'm going to share the screen. I have your website that I want to show people, and let's see here. Do you see that on the screen?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Teamdynamics.org. That's great.
Yeah, this is I like this website. It's very clean and clear, and as you can all see here, there's a lot of very helpful information, and there is a contact button there, and let's see right here, schedule your one-on-one phone consultation. So this is great. Thank you for, I know that you work really hard at this website. It looks great.
People can also feel free to contact me also by email and ask me questions about anything. I'm always glad to share ideas and just try to help people on their way.
Very good. Well, I want to show one more thing here, just since we're getting close to the month of, let's see, May. What am I? Let's see. I don't know if I chose the right thing to present. Hold on just a minute. Am I showing the Dr. McDougall website?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I just want to also encourage people to go to drmcdougall.com and under education, I think, or programs, actually. Here we have the 3-day intensive program, and the one that is upcoming is May 13th through 15th. And Dr. McDougall, of course, is going to be there and lecturing. And also, you will be there, right, Dr. Lisle?
Always, you bet.
Oh, all right. And then we also have Jeff Novak that will be there. And I really encourage you all to attend. This is a great way to get started in your journey of plant-based eating diet.
Terrific.
Very good. Well, we look forward to next month, and I appreciate your making the time to be here with us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everybody.